Okay, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for the Fertilizing Effectively in Central Florida Soils webinar. We will get started. So for this webinar, we are going to be utilizing the question and answer for any questions that you may have for the panelists. You can do that by navigating to your Zoom bar, and you'd be able to select the Q&A or question and answer. Please use that for any questions that you might have for the panelists. The chat is going to be for any IT issues. If you can't hear us, you can't see us, or you just want to say hello, things like that. Use the chat. And we are recording, just so you know, but your videos and audios are automatically set to off, so you'll only see the panelists for today. We will have a survey following the end of this webinar. You can either do QR code and we will email it to you as well. So whatever your preference is, we do appreciate your participation. So for today, we have myself, Tina McIntyre. I'm Florida Friendly Landscaping Agent with the UF-IFAS Extension in Seminole County. We have Terrence Fullerton, who is our Seminole County Fertilizer Educator. Tia Silvasi, who's with the Florida Friendly Landscaping Agent with the UF-IFAS Extension in Orange County. We have Jacques Worley, who's the Strategic Engagement Coordinator for Orange County Environmental Protection Division. And Megan Martin, who is the Be Floridian Now Coordinator with Volusia County. So it is all three counties coming together for you today to answer any questions you may have. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started. Just a quick outline is we have a little bit about each county, and then we'll cover how your landscape really connects to our local watershed. I'll go over some lawn care best management practices, some fertilizer fundamentals, and then specifically the county ordinances as they relate to each county. So like I mentioned, here in Seminole County, we have myself, Tina McIntyre, and our fertilizer educator, Terrence Fullerton. We do focus on fertilizer workshops, so we usually offer them. We typically were doing twice a month before the pandemic, and we have been doing them virtually since the pandemic as well. We really focus on fertilizer because we're home to the Wekiva River, where we have about 26%, you can see here on this data, this pie chart, 26% of our urban turfgrass fertilizer is coming from, into the Wekiva as nitrate pollution through urban turfgrass. And so we want to focus on using fertilizer appropriately as a tool that feeds our plants rather than pollutes our waterways. So we've also had this shown here, which is our Seminole County Fertilizer Ordinance for commercial applicants. So if you are a landscape professional, there are additional kind of requirements that we have, which includes being a licensed professional, having taken the GIBMP qualifications through the University of Florida, and all of the things that we'll get into on this webinar apply to the residential landscape as well as the commercial, and we will cover the exemptions. So I think now I'm going to turn it over to Jacques.
Yes, thank you, Tina. Good afternoon to you all. As Tina mentioned, my name is Jacques Worley, and I'm with Orange County Environmental Protection Division, to be specific. And in my role, I help with compliance. I facilitate compliance with Orange County's ordinance, and that entails communicating and engaging with residents, retail establishments, as well as commercial applicators. And we have our website here on the far right where we have a lot of our information. But we also have that decal, which you see here, the trained applicator decal, which is a requirement for ordinance for the commercial applicators applying fertilizer in our county. In addition to myself within Orange County, we also have Tia Silvasi with us, and she's the Florida Friendly Landscaping Agent, doing a majority of the education and everything on that part as it relates to fertilizer and Florida Friendly Landscaping.
All right, and hello everyone. My name is Megan Martin. I'm coming from Volusia County. A little bit of background here about us, and then I can get more into Volusia County specific things at the end of the presentation as well. So Volusia County adopted a sustainability action plan in 2014. We have a program called Green Volusia that coordinates the sustainability action plan's goals, which includes the fertilizer ordinance. So Be Floridian Now is a collaboration between all of those groups and organizations that you see on your screen, including Green Volusia. Up in Volusia County, you may see us. Be Floridian Now is our education and outreach for our fertilizer ordinance. So I will tell you more about Be Floridian Now at the end of the webinar.
Excellent, thank you guys. So diving right in, just a little bit about the Florida Friendly Landscaping Program. It is in state law, so it includes the Florida Friendly Landscaping Program, which is really made of these 9 principles, which I'll go into in a future slide. But just to kind of boil it down, you know, the program really is a water quality and water quantity program aimed at conserving our water, protecting us from pollution and waste. It looks at creating wildlife habitat and preventing erosion into our waterways. And it is a joint partnership program between the University of Florida, IFAS Extension, and the Florida Department of Environmental Protection. And so these 2 agencies are really work together to offer the program in many counties throughout our state. And like I mentioned, those 9 principles. So we're going to be focusing on fertilizing appropriately today. But together we offer lots of other really great workshops that focus on a variety of topics, including right plant, right place. So if we can put a plant that's going to be really doing very well in a place that's it's suited for, we're going to be using, you know, less input, so less water and things like that. Watering efficiently, so making sure that we're calibrating our irrigation, and we do a lot of classes and webinars on that. Mulch is its own principle, and we do get into that a little bit in this class, but mulch provides so much to our landscape. Fertilizing, I'm going to just breeze through because we're going to touch on that today. Recycling yard waste, you know, that might not be something that's intuitive. A lot of people just think to put it in a bag and put it to the curb, but those leaves and branches and things are really valuable to increasing the organic material in your soils, and we'll talk a little bit about that too. Florida Friendly Program also encourages attracting wildlife such as, you know, pollinators and butterflies, birds, frogs, things like that, and creating an environment that they are allowed to flourish as well. Part of that includes controlling our yard pests responsibly. So we don't want to be routine pesticide application, you know, so that we're constantly spraying pesticides on our landscape, because it does inhibit our insect populations. And so we want to be identifying those insects, seeing if they're a good bug, bad bug, and then, you know, moving forward accordingly. And then, like I mentioned, the Florida Friendly Landscaping Program is really a program that aims to reduce stormwater runoff and protect our waterfront. So there's lots of little things that we can do that we'll talk about in this webinar to do so. So why water quality? Well, water quality is really important to our human health, the future of our, you know, water, the drinking supply. It has obviously value to wildlife. So we have actually a fair bear population here in Seminole County. And, you know, they rely solely on the rainwater and the surface water to get by. So we want to think about, you know, the value to wildlife. And really it ties into recreation as well. So if you like to fish or boat or get out on the water, enjoy those springs, you know, we want to keep those a quality environment for our future and our current generation. So just to kind of look at what happens in a watershed when it rains, and, you know, we're just kind of coming out of our rainy season with lots of very heavy torrential downpours. Everything, you know, that experiences that rain is going to be subjected to really carrying debris. That rain's going to pick up debris within the watershed and help put it into our lakes, rivers, and streams. or potentially our stormwater ponds. So those are included in this. So depending on where you're at in the matrix, it could be a residential landscape, maybe you're closer to a wilderness area, maybe you live next to a farm or on a farm, or a factory area. All of those are going to have different types of pollution that ultimately make their way to our waterways. And so when we look at how this pollution interfaces with our different environments, we have the natural water cycle, which would be something more like a wilderness area, you know, a forest type of thing, or an urban water cycle. And in the urban water cycle, we tend to have lots of pavements, lots of impervious surfaces. So, you know, roads and parking lots and things like that. And in the natural water cycle, the real differences are that we have a lot more evapotranspiration. And for those of you that aren't familiar with that word, it basically is the way that the trees cleanse the water. And so they take that water from, you know, their root zone and they push it up into the atmosphere through their stomata and various, you know, ways that they cleanse it. So we also have infiltration into our soils and into our aquifer. So that water is going to be able to percolate and filter down through our soils, get cleaned into our pure water aquifer. And, you know, we do have some runoff, but we have less runoff than, say, in the urban setting. In the urban setting, we tend to have, again, more pavement so that we're getting less infiltration into our aquifer. We have less evapotranspiration getting replaced with just straight evaporation. And so we're not getting that cleansing process that we see in, say, a natural setting. And usually more runoff. So with that runoff, we get high velocity, larger amounts of pollution, larger amounts of debris and stormwater. And so, you know, really these two places are different, but what we want to do is take this urban setting and make it more similar to our natural setting and our natural matrix. And we'll give you tips of how you can do that as we move forward. So talking a little bit about what is in our stormwater pollution, well, it's called non-point source pollution. So we have, you know, nutrients that could be picked up in the residential setting or maybe an academic field or athletic field, excuse me, you know, such as nitrogen and phosphorus. You might have some bacteria that gets picked up from dog poo or could be from cattle, depending on where you live. Maybe there's some sediment. And this might not be, you know, seem like too big of a deal, but erosion really does cause a lot of problems in terms of filling in our stormwater ponds. You know, if you have a little sand island in the middle of your pond, you're going to have to dredge it. And it becomes a problem for our waterways as well if we want to have navigable canals and things like that. So that's why our silt fences and, you know, things like that that are so important in preventing erosion are critical. And then toxic organics also come into the mix when we look at, you know, pesticides or oils and things like that from roadways. So kind of the cycle that we have here in Florida is we have excess nutrients in our environment and in our waterway. And instead of feeding our turf grass or our plants, we're feeding our excessive algae and aquatic weed growth, which reduces the water clarity. And that disrupts the balance of oxygen levels in our water and can lead to fish kills. Just so last week, I got a call from a fish kill in Winter Springs. And, you know, so it does happen. This is something that can occur in stormwater ponds that are not that old. And if the nutrient balance is disrupted, we can ultimately arrive at a loss of recreation, which is, you know, not good for anyone because it does cost the taxpayers a lot of money to remediate these instances. And in the meantime, you know, we can't access it like you can see this kayaker here. So what do we do? How can we help? And what are some tips for how we can manage our lawns in conjunction with having healthy waterways? Well, the top two stressors of turf are basically watering too much or too little and mowing too short. So we're basically scalping the grass when we should be allowing for much more of that leaf to grow. So when we're watering improperly, we're applying either more or less of 1/2 to 3/4 of an inch per application. So that basically is that includes the rain. So if you're having a lot of storms and you're having a lot of rain at your location, which can be detected through a rain gauge, or even, you know, some applications on your phone, you can tell you how much it rained. And you're also irrigating, sometimes you can have a lot of problems with the turf grass and starting to decline. The proper amount is that 1/2 to 3/4 of an inch. The root zone can become compromised. So it can have things like fungus or root rot, things like that. Your pest problems can increase. Your drought tolerance will decrease. And so we want to challenge our plants to see, you know, obviously we love them, we don't want them to die, but we want to see what they're capable of. And, you know, can they make it through a week where, you know, we're just relying on rainwater? We want to select those drought tolerant, Florida friendly species to do so. If we are overwatering, we tend to see a lot of dollarweed and weeds increase. So we really want to make sure that we're calibrating our irrigation as a supplement to the rainwater. And then again, mowing too short. So each variety and species of turfgrass has a different requirement for what it prefers. Centipede and zoysia grass like it a little bit shorter, where St. Augustine is going to like it a little bit taller. So almost 3 to 4 inches, 3.5 to 4 inches is ideal. So if you're taking it down to a couple inches, then you're going to have a stressed out stand of turf grass. Now, here's some tips for best mowing practices. And let me know when I turn it over to Tia soon. So just don't let me go too far here, sorry. So some best mowing practices are to make sure that you're mowing at that desired height. So again, zoysia is a little bit lower than our bahia and our St. Augustine. We don't want to remove more than 1/3 of the blade at a time. So say you go on vacation or have a busy week and you come back and your grass is really tall, you want to take it down 1/3, but not more than that, because that's again going to stress out the turf. Leave those grass clippings on the lawn. They're valuable organic material along with nutrients. So we want to support the turf grass by doing that. We don't want to mow when it's wet outside, and we want to keep those mower blades sharp so that we get a nice clean cut like a surgeon, rather than, you know, an area where we can get lots of disease entering and fungus entering. And then using those mulcher blades if you have one. So we want to keep grass clippings on the lawn. The average home has about 400 pounds of grass clippings in 1 year. Those decompose into nitrogen and phosphorus, and don't ever leave them on a paved surface, because that's going to ultimately get washed down into our storm drain and end up in our water body. So don't ever blow them down the storm drain. We always want to make sure we're reusing that as compost or as a self-generating in our turf system. So now turning it over to Tia for fertilizer fundamentals.
Okay, actually this is Terrence's part.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yes, it is. Thank you, Tina. We want to take a very quick look at the nutrients that plants need. And there are several of them. Carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen are normally not called nutrients because they are normally taken up from the environment in the form of water or carbon dioxide from the air. The ones that we normally refer to as nutrients are nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, calcium, magnesium, and sulfur. And those are often referred to as macronutrients, the word macro meaning big. We need large amounts of them. And we have some nutrients that are needed in much smaller quantities: iron, manganese, boron, copper, molybdenum, and zinc. And those are called micronutrients because of the small quantities that are needed. One of the common mistakes that is made is to ignore the micronutrients because of the small amounts needed. They can cause as much problem as a lack of the macronutrients. And in Florida, we have a large number of micronutrient problems, particularly manganese. Next slide, please. Okay, the nitrogen is a nutrient that is absolutely essential for plants, especially for turf. And it is an important part of the chlorophyll molecule, the stuff that makes plants green. Without it, plants can't grow, and just about every soil in Florida requires it. So it has to be used if you want a healthy landscape, but there are some problems with it since it can cause pollution. Phosphorus is also an important nutrient, an essential nutrient. And throughout the world, you find a lot of phosphorus deficiency. Florida is a bit unusual in that most of the soils in Florida contain sufficient phosphorus. And therefore, we really don't need to use it except in a few exceptional cases. It is also a pollutant. Most of the time you see a lake turning green, it's because of algae growing because of a phosphorus problem. So in most of the ordinances, all of them in Central Florida, prohibit you from using phosphorus unless you have done a soil test, because it normally is not needed and can cause pollution problems. Potassium is a big problem in Central Florida. It's absolutely essential more for the health of the plant rather than growth. If you are having a lot of disease problems, poor cold tolerance, poor drought tolerance, chances are you have a potassium problem. And in many parts of the world, potassium levels are okay to good. Florida, of course, has to be different. The levels are very, very low. Potassium is not regulated by any of the ordinances because it's not a pollutant, but for healthy plants, you must have potassium. Next slide, please. Now, how do you know what fertilizer what nutrients your fertilizer bag contains? Florida law requires that there must be 3 numbers on the bag. The first number is always the nitrogen content. The second is always the phosphorus content. And the third is always the potassium content. That is law, not only in Florida, but in most other areas of the country. And as I mentioned, in Florida, in Central Florida, you should not use phosphorus unless you have done a soil test. It means then that the second number, the phosphorus number, should be 0 unless you have done a soil test. Next slide, please. Now, soil testing is the only real way to know whether or not you are using the right fertilizer. If you don't do a soil test and you are just picking fertilizers off the shelf, you have no clue if it is providing what you need. You need to test your pH, which I'll talk about more in a while. You need to see what your levels of phosphorus and potassium and manganese and so on are to make sure that you use the correct fertilizer. If you don't do that, then you are going to be having problems with either applying nutrients that you don't need, which is a waste of money and potential pollution problems, or you may not be applying the nutrients you do need, which causes poor growth. For example, in Florida, Central Florida especially, we have a lot of manganese and magnesium problems. And if those are missing from the soil, your standard landscape fertilizer will not work. So unless you have done a soil test to determine which ones are needed, you will not be able to really get healthy growth and environmentally friendly growth by just picking fertilizers at random. Next slide, please. One of the big things that has to be measured when you do a soil test is the pH, which is the level of acidity. A value of 7 is considered neutral, above 7 is alkaline, and below 7 is considered acidic. And in Florida, we can get values from as low as 4, which is very acidic, all the way up to above 8, which is very alkaline. And we can get large variations within a short distance. If you go further south to Miami, Homestead, generally they have high pH values. But in Central Florida, in the counties we are looking at, you can get a large variation within a short distance. Now, what happens when your pH is off? The photograph on the right shows you what happens when you have a pH that is correct. That's the roots you see on the extreme right, a pH value of around 6, 6.5, just a little bit of acidity, that is ideal for most plants, and you get very healthy root growths. As the pH drops to around 5, the roots in the middle, they don't grow as well. They don't take up nutrients, they don't take up moisture, and you have poor growth. And as it drops to near 4, like the roots on the left, you get extremely poor growth. And there are many areas in Central Florida where this happens. We have seen many cases where people are resodding their yards every year, and at the end of the year, you can practically pick up the sod. It never develops a proper root. And they spend lots of money trying all kinds of fertilizers, over irrigating, doing everything that they can, and they get poor growth because of low pH, very common in Central Florida. So if you are having problems with your plants not growing well, you should really have a soil test done. And even if you don't do the full test, the minimum you should do is a pH test, because there's a very good chance that you have a low pH or high pH. And unless you treat that problem, no amount of fertilizer is going to work. Next slide, please. I will now turn you over to Megan to talk about best management practices.
Right, thank you, Terrence. So yeah, so let's, now that we understand a little more about the fundamentals of fertilizing, let's get into some of those details. So beginning with slow release nitrogen or controlled release nitrogen, these terms refer to fertilizer granules that allow the nitrogen to become slowly available to the plant over time. So in contrast, we have quick release nitrogen sources. Quick release or water soluble nitrogen, it pretty immediately becomes available to the plant, but unfortunately it also poses a greater risk to our water bodies, you know, especially in summer rains. So this is why the 3 counties here today, Volusia, Orange, and Seminole, all have fertilizer ordinances that require at a minimum of 50% slow release nitrogen. And so we'll talk more about the differences between the counties and a little bit more of the details, but just so you know that this is referring to that slow availability. So the figure on the left of your screen there kind of illustrates how this is possible. There's a couple of different ways that the slow release or controlled release nitrogen granules work, but essentially the nutrients slowly diffuse over time through the semi-permeable membrane that is on the outside coating of the granule. So that's one of those ways that that works. Next slide. Okay, so there are quite a few benefits to the slow release, to using slow release nitrogen. These nitrogen sources that are slow release are properly formulated, so they do last through the summer rainy season, and that's going to be really important when we talk more about a restricted period in the summer rainy season. Essentially the more efficient use of the nitrogen, because it's only becoming available to the plants as they need it, it means that less needs to be applied, which means that less is getting as at risk of getting washed into our rivers, lakes, and you know, springs. So our water bodies that we care about. Go ahead next. Thank you. Okay, so how do we know if it's 50% or more slow release? Essentially, every fertilizer bag is going to have this guaranteed analysis label. Just like Terrence mentioned, it always will have those 3 numbers that always mean the same thing. The fertilizer bag will also have this guaranteed analysis label. At the bottom of the guaranteed analysis label, you can see that on the case of the left, it says that 7% of that bag's nitrogen is slowly available nitrogen, right? So you take that bottom number, which is the slow release percentage, and you divide it by the total nitrogen percentage up at the top, which is 14% of the bag is nitrogen total. So that's 7% slow out of 14% total. So that's a 50% slow release content. And again, on the right, you can see at the bottom, this one has 8% slowly available nitrogen out of a total of 16% total nitrogen. So that 8 out of 16 gives you 50% slow release nitrogen. So that's how you can calculate, especially if you have a fertilizer that you've been using and you're not sure, you can look at that label check that out. Next. Okay, and then it's very important to remember what Terrence was saying about Florida being high in phosphorus. All plants do need phosphorus, but we do have those elevated levels of phosphorus throughout most of the state of Florida. This is again to reiterate the importance of soil testing. Phosphorus, and this is in all of our ordinances also and across the 3 counties, phosphorus can only be applied if you have a soil test proving a deficiency. So if you think that you have a phosphorus deficiency, get that soil test and see to confirm that suspicion. Next slide. Thank you. So the timing of your fertilizing is also very important. You cannot apply it when rain is forecast or if there's a severe weather or storm system watch or warning, and it is also prohibited when the soils are saturated. Next slide. Thank you. And so essentially, this slide is talking about the restricted season. So each of the 3 counties have a restricted period from June 1st through September 30th. And this is when nitrogen or phosphorus may not be applied during this time period. So that first number of the bag, nitrogen, and then the second number of the bag, if you did get that soil test and you did have a deficiency, then you still cannot apply it during this time, this summer rainy period. So only outside of this, that restricted period. So you don't want to fertilize within 24 hours of a rain event. And then again, this is June 1st through September 30th is that period when we historically see the most rain. So we're going to be having, those torrential downpours, and we definitely want to not be fertilizing during that time period. Okay. Next. All right, so something to remember is if you must fertilize, twice is nice. Just think twice is nice. So once in the spring and once in the fall with that 50% or more slow release nitrogen will carry you through that summer rainy season without posing that extra risk to our water bodies. So you could, for example, you see in the illustration, there's this period of time in the early spring and then at the in the fall as well, at the end of fall there, you can see that there's still growth happening, but this is not during the rainy season. So those are the areas when that's what twice as nice is referring to, is once in the spring before that restricted period. So that's prior to June 1st when the plants are growing. So April or May, and then once in the fall after September 30th. So you could do that, in October when the plants are still growing, but it's outside of that restricted period. Next. Oh, there it is. Okay, and so essentially this is, to reiterate the importance of choosing the right fertilizer. And again, the importance of soil testing. So many of the common fertilizers that you can purchase in the store are not necessarily suitable for Florida, especially, if they have a high nitrogen content, but a very small potassium content, or if they have really high, levels of phosphorus, which again is the middle number, nitrogen was the first, phosphorus, potassium is the third number there. So if that middle number is really high, that's not appropriate for Florida either. And then you want, generally speaking, your potassium, which is the third number in the bag, to be about, or at least half of the nitrogen level, which is the first number on the bag. And I think I'm going to hand it off to Jacques now.
Thank you, Megan. Thank you all for bringing us this far to the presentation. How much fertilizer do you need, right? So we've talked a lot about throughout this presentation in regards to slow release. Terrence talked about the micronutrients, the macro pieces, but typically, like, how much fertilizer do you typically need, right? And Megan mentioned to remember twice is nice, and that's because some of the more common turf grass that we have species, that's St. Augustine, zoysia, and Bahia, all have a recommendation of 1 to 2 pounds of nitrogen per year, and that equates to about 2 application, right? 1 or 2 application, as you can see on this table here. So right before the summer restricted period, around April is prime, and of course right now we are outside of that period. We're in the fall, and October would be an ideal time if of course rain is not forecasted to fertilize. Next, please. In addition to fertilizing, applying 1 pound of nitrogen per 1,000 square foot per application, that is the ordinance requirements from all 3 counties. So again, that is 1 pound of nitrogen per 1,000 square feet per application. And going that way, you will be able to provide your turf grass with the recommended amount of nitrogen. And once you're done fertilizing, it's paramount that you apply a little bit of water to water in that fertilizer. And a little bit is about 1/4 inch. So you don't want to run your irrigation system fully right after fertilizing, but leaving it on just enough that you can assure that you get a little bit of water in there, about 1/4 inch in the soil. In addition, keep fertilizer where it belongs. A requirement by the ordinances is to utilize a deflector shield near any type of water body or conveyances. Any hard surface, you should have a deflector shield, and what it does, it literally prevents fertilizer from going to areas you do not want, which is the water bodies or sidewalks, the impervious surfaces that don't need to be fertilized. The deflector shield prevents that, and that's a requirement by the ordinance. In addition, you should leave at least 15 feet of a maintenance zone where there is no fertilizer being applied next to any waterfront, right? So the entire idea is that we're trying to do our very best, the utmost possible, to prevent fertilizer from going into our water bodies. So if you're adhering to this 15 feet fertilizer-free maintenance zone, you are increasing the chances that fertilizer will not make it down there to your water bodies. Next. So summer fertilizer blends. Terrence earlier talked about micronutrients and all the things that they can do, right? So summer fertilizer blends or micronutrient blends are nitrogen and phosphorus free. So they typically don't have those 2 macronutrients of nitrogen and phosphorus that typically are the main polluters of our water systems. Because they are free of nitrogen and phosphorus, they can be applied throughout the year, as long as, of course, the soil is not saturated and there's no rain that is forecast. They can be applied, but they're very specific. For example, so having a soil test will tell you exactly which type of micronutrient you should get. But for example, manganese is one micronutrient that enhances disease resistance. Lime helps with acidic soils. Potassium improves the overall plant health, and iron often gives your plant a good boost of color, right? So there's all these micronutrients beside just nitrogen and phosphorus that can be utilized on your landscapes to improve it. In addition, compost as well can also be used throughout, as long as, of course, climate permits. Next, please. So when it comes to commercial applicators, there are several requirements from all the counties as it relates to that piece, but it's important for residents and commercial applicators to kind of have that communication in regards to knowing what exactly is happening on your lawn, Are the commercial applicators, are they qualified? Are they certified? Are they trained? Are they familiar with the ordinance of your county? Next. So in general, some bigger similarities that we have between all three counties is no phosphorus unless a soil test shows that it's needed, and a minimum of 50% slow release nitrogen to be used. All of us observe the restricted period from June to September 30th. We all have a restriction on fertilizing within 15 feet of a waterway. And we are very big on keeping fertilizer in grass clippings on the lawn and not on the street or into any impervious surface. Next. Some places, so when it comes, overall, the ordinances apply to both turf and plants, like Tina and some of us mentioned. But when it comes to bona fide agriculture operations, such as farms, for example, those are exempt. Vegetable gardens also exempt. Athletic fields, recreational fields or turf are exempt. And fruit trees also exempt unless they are 15 feet away from a water body. If they are that close, then they have to they fall in line within that ordinance. So those are the only entities that are exempt, are the vegetable garden, farm pieces, and then recreational and athletic fields. Next. Specifically, when it comes to Orange County's ordinance, it applies to all of our municipalities, all 13 of them follow this ordinance. It's aimed at addressing and engaging with commercial applicators, residents, and retail establishments. For example, this main poster that you see here with the attention sign on it, that's signage that is required to be placed at the retail establishments selling fertilizer. So we have those signage in all of the stores, Home Depot, Lowe's, Walmart, and any of the smaller ones that are also selling fertilizer, as a way to educate the public about some BMPs related to fertilizer use. Residents are required to take a training on our website, and the link was just provided on the chat. It's also on here, and that training kind of goes through sort of what we're talking about, some of the best management practices related to fertilizer use and the protection of our water bodies. And of course, I mentioned that this decal to the bottom right here for commercial applicators, and it's an easy decal for residents, for the public to look at a truck, for example, and know that this commercial applicator is compliant, right? They have taken the GIBMP, they do have their license. It's an easy way of being able to recognize those that are licensed and certified. So for commercial applicators, it's relatively easy to get. You already have the required training. It's just send an email to epb@ocfl.net and request the decal for your vehicles, and they'll be shipped to you within a couple of weeks. Next.
Okay, I will jump in here, seeing that we're going to talk about Seminole County Fertilizer Ordinance. As Jacques mentioned, there are a lot of similarities between the ordinances in all the counties, but there are some differences. For example, in Seminole County, legally, the ordinance only applies to the unincorporated areas of Seminole County. However, the cities of Altamont Springs, Castleberry, Lake Mary, Longwood, and Oviedo have all adopted the same ordinance as the county. So while legally the county does not implement the ordinance in those areas, the requirements are still the same. The city of Winter Springs has a slightly different ordinance. They follow the state model, and there are some small differences between the county ordinance and the state model. So if you live in Winter Springs, you need to find out more about the state model. The city of Sanford has not yet adopted an ordinance, and our recommendation to residents in Sanford is that until an ordinance is adopted, they should voluntarily follow the county ordinance, because it more or less covers everything that the ordinance will eventually cover. So if you follow the county ordinance, when the city ordinance comes in place, there'll be very little, if anything, to change. I will now turn you over to Megan, who will tell you about Volusia County.
All right. Hi again, everyone. So yes, here in Volusia County, we also have partnered with the stores selling the fertilizer to get those educational flyers here and there on your screen at the fertilizer sections of all of those stores. So that includes your big box stores, and we're also working on increasing those partnerships with all of the stores. So so that fertilizer ordinance applies to all cities in Volusia County except for the city of Deltona. The city of Deltona has its own ordinance, and it is similar to the state model also. So essentially, for more information about Be Floridian Now and how to fertilize like a Floridian, we encourage you to visit befloridiannow.org. There's also going to be in a second an additional resources page where there's going to be resources listed from Volusia County. There's a newsletter that you can sign up for, Be Floridian Now newsletter, to learn about things that are happening regionally. But there's also a lot of information about the other counties as well. So stay tuned for that. And of course, feel free to contact me with any questions, but go ahead and we'll move on to the next slide.
All right, thank you, Megan. So I'm going to be wrapping it up for us. So fertilizer is essential to your lawn to keep your grass green and looking good, but do your part to protect our waterways and use it responsibly, because what happens in our yards ends up in our water and can make an impact on our environment. So use the strategies that we mentioned in the webinar today. Make sure you're fertilizing in the spring and in the fall, and when there's not a heavy rain like we get in the summer. That's why the ordinances are in place. And use the slow release fertilizer and no additional phosphorus unless it's needed. Next slide. And here's the link that we have shared in the chat box, and it's here again, the Tri-County Fertilizer webinar. And this has links to all of our web pages from our 3 counties. It has some YouTube videos that show how to read a fertilizer label. This webinar was just an introduction to fertilizer to give you the basics, but it's hard to digest it all at once. So please do visit the web pages and sign up for our social media sites and newsletters and stuff, so you can continue to learn how to best take care of your lawn. And so at this time, if you want to take your cell phone and scan the QR code to take our survey, on my phone, I just have to use the camera app, and it opens up the Qualtrics survey, and you can take that right now and let us know if you learned something in the class today. The survey is really important for us to be serving you, and let us know what your needs are, how good the information is, what else do you need to know to be successful in your landscaping at home. And we'll also be sending a link to the survey in a follow-up email. So at this time, if you have any questions, please type them in the chat box and we can answer your questions. And also write down our emails, our contact emails here for your representatives in your county. If you're in Seminole County, you contact Tina and Terrence. If you're in Orange County, you can contact myself and Jacques, and then Megan in Volusia County. So thank you for attending, and we'll take any questions now.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone. We did get a question about life on the lake. So if people live close to the lake or in close proximity to a stormwater pond, Tia, do you want to just touch on some lakeside best management practices?
Yeah, sure. So we have a ton of lakes here in Central Florida, and they're really a valuable resource. We want to keep the water clean. So the best management practice would be to have a vegetative buffer. So 10 to 15 foot of some native aquatic plants in the water, like on the slope, even up above. And that way you don't need to be mowing it. You don't need to be fertilizing it. It doesn't need irrigation. And that will help to keep the water very clean. And if you need any plant recommendations, you can email me. Some of the best aquatic plants are like a purple pickerel weed, the duck potato, there's the native flag iris. We also have the native yellow canna. One of my favorite is the sand cordgrass, which is great if you want to keep your lake view because it only grows about 4 feet tall. And then once a year in the fall, you just give it a little haircut back down to 2 feet, and you can use the grass clippings as your mulch, and then it will grow back up. And so that's one of the easiest things to maintain, even easier than turf grass, because often, you know, down by the lake, you get torpedo grass, you get dollar weed, you get some weeds that are tough to deal with. So that cordgrass, it grows up and it outcompetes the weeds, it shades them all out. So that's a great one. Also cypress trees, you know, people love to see cypress trees. And if you have planted around, then you don't have to worry about the knees and mowing the knees. So those are just a couple of my favorite aquatic plants.
That's awesome. Thank you, Tia. We did get a question about the slides being available. So later, about maybe in the next 24 to 48 hours, I will be emailing out not only the survey, but a PDF of our slides and some other great links and information to encourage you to learn more. We also got a question here about verifying what landscape company you're using. So I just wanted to highlight real quick on our fertilizeflorida.com website, we have a landscape professional checklist. So if you are hiring a professional, these are just some quick questions to ask them. Make sure that they're certified with UF-IFAS and the GIBMP. Make sure that they're licensed with the Department of Ag so that they're, you know, if they're spreading anything or spraying anything, they should have a license. You know, are they testing your soil for pH? And then it walks you through all the different things that we talked about today, which again, if you're in Seminole County, this is tailored for Seminole, but it does pretty well cover the Orange and Volusia County ordinances as well, because they're very similar. So it's a great tool that, again, you can check out these websites. And then main Tricounty fertilizer website that we texted in the chat, that has a link to all of our websites. So it's really great. Again, fertilizeflorida.com for that handout specifically. And I will email out a bunch of links and various resources. Great. Any other comments that you guys wanted to add from the chat that you're seeing at all?
I just want to reiterate that now is the time to fertilize for the fall. So we had the blackout zone in Orange County until, you know, September 30th. So now it's October. We have had an early rainy October, but now it is kind of seeming to dry up. And so you can go ahead and buy your fertilizer now and fertilize right now, because as we go into the winter, then the grass is going to be going dormant. And so we want to get it while there's still some active growth.
Excellent. And then we did have one other question. Just Jacques, do you mind reiterating what is exempt from the fertilizer ordinances?
Yes, I can. So related to exemption, we have the bona fide agricultural operations such as farms and vegetable gardens. And then we have as well as athletic and turf fields. So that includes like places that people are playing sports, soccer, but also like golf as well. Those entities are exempt from this specific ordinance here.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. And any questions, go ahead and type them in either the question and answer. We are also monitoring the chat. And I'm not seeing anything else coming in. So just a reminder, you can use this QR code now to complete the survey. We very much appreciate it. I'll also be emailing you a link later if you don't get to it right now. That way you have either one option or the other to be able to complete the survey. So we really appreciate it.
And Tina, I went ahead and put that survey link in the chat. And there is one more question about pesticides. So using pesticides in the yard. So what we recommend in Florida-friendly landscaping is to avoid using pesticides in the first place by choosing the right plant for the right place. You know, native plants and hardy plants, drought-tolerant plants, they shouldn't get much pests and diseases, but you know, sometimes you do need to spray. And in that case, we like to use the least toxic pesticide as possible, like organic pesticides or natural pesticides. For example, in our vegetable garden, sometimes we get caterpillars and we will use an organic spray that's made from a bacteria called BT, which is short for Bacillus thuringiensis. And then if you had a more severe pest problem, like you know, thrips or spider mites, you might have to use something a little bit more toxic. And so you kind of have to know your pest, like what bug are you dealing with or what weed are you dealing with if you're talking about an herbicide, and choose the correct pesticide to match that pest, and always read and follow the label on the pesticide containers.
Yeah, that's a great question coming in from Pauline. Thanks for all your great questions. I know I was just mixing up some neem oil spray the other day because I got a bad scale outbreak on my little veggie garden. So, you know, there's lots of horticultural soaps and oils that you can select. And really it's, you know, identifying, and our master gardeners in all 3 counties are happy to help you to identify the insect. Make sure that it's a bad bug, because there's lots of really good bugs out there too that can provide service to keep that Florida-friendly balance in our yards. So great. Anything else the panelists want to add before we wrap it up? I'm not seeing too many other comments or questions coming in.
I just want to add that although we spoke about slow-release fertilizers being important for turf, it is even more important for slow-growing plants like fruit trees and ornamental trees. In those cases, if you can find 100% slow release, it's expensive, but it works much better. Quick release fertilizer is really useless when you are growing slow-growing trees and palms.
Yeah, unless you want to be running out there every other day. That's an exaggeration, but frequently, right?
Yeah, a lot of the quick release fertilizer is washed out very quickly, far quicker than a tree crop can take it up. So you really need slow release in those cases. Even in fruit trees where there is no legal requirement to use it, you should still use it because it's a good thing to do.
Yeah, feed your trees, you know, slow and steady rather than all at once where they can't take it up. That's a great point, Terrence.
Excellent. Well, thank you to all of our panelists, and thank you all for joining us today. Look out for our email, and we'll see you on the next webinar.
Thank you all.
Bye, everybody. Thanks for coming.
Thanks,
Bye.
everyone.